Okay, so this is the bank challenge. This is the challenge that's due on Monday. So again, the focus for this challenge is all about the TD process, looking at the requirements and forming a domain model and deciding to work on some tests and then passing them through a red-green refactor cycle. It extends all the stuff we've been doing for the past week or two to get you to put everything together. So in order to have a good go at this, I want you to think about how to start, all right, that first test. So here are the requirements. You should be able to interact with your code via your sort of console. So I don't want you to worry about finding a way to use your program from the command line interface. Just go through the normal process of launching your node REPL, requiring your classes, and playing around with it. And that's all that this you should need to be able to do. All right, we're not worrying about that presentation there just yet. I want you to be able to deposit and withdraw and have an account statement. And that's as simple as we're going to go for this challenge. And here's a sample of a specific acceptance criterion. So you can see here it's given to you in the given, when, then syntax. So given a client makes a deposit of 1,000 on the specific date, the 10th of January. Notice it's 10th of January 2012, so it's a while ago. And a deposit of blah, 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 and a withdrawal. When she prints a bank statement, then she would see the following. So this is the output that you would want to see in your console. In order to complete this challenge, these are the things that you have to meet. All right, and so it has to be able to achieve this output. I want you to think always about test first. Passes the test clearly, and your code is linted, so make sure you've got your linter set up. It encapsulates the responsibility of adding and storing transactions in a class, statement, and transaction data. So here are some classes for you to think about when you form your domain model. You might not want to do it straight away. You might want to just start with everything in one class to begin with, and then think about how you can extract classes. That's a very valid approach, entirely up to you. But I want to see you using more than 2 classes for this challenge and getting them to work together. So in order to start, what is a really good first test is simply to take this information and convert it into a test. And so this leads on to the idea of what's the difference between a unit test and essentially a high-level feature test. A way that we can describe this is, if I can draw it out for you, we're quite familiar, hopefully by now, with simple TDD cycle. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Cool. So we've got our 3-part cycle. All right, red, green, refactor. Red means you write a test. And importantly, some of you probably aren't still doing this. You write a test and you have to watch it fail. All right, run your test and watch it fail. This is the red. The green is you then make a pass. Usually in the simplest way possible. All right, sometimes this will force you to write more tests. And then any opportunities to refactor, reorganize your code. And then you go back to writing more tests. All right, so this is a simple TD cycle. What I'm saying is this is specifically for a unit, all right, a method that has a return value or something that's happening that you want to assert on. And there's another layer to this, or another cycle called well, it's the same cycle, but it's called for a feature. and they work hand in hand. Let me write this arrow better. No, I'm going to go back to my first arrow because I like that arrow. Run out of space, but fine. So we still go through the same process, write a failing feature test, then it's going to pass, and then we have any opportunities to refactor. But the important part about this is not just a unit test, this is like a high-level feature test, and I'll give you a demonstration of what this is. And we make it fail, and then that will cause us to write unit tests. And we will write a bunch of unit tests until they all pass. And if all the unit tests pass, then the feature test will pass, and we can continue on our journey. So they go hand in hand. Another way to look at this is like if we write one feature test, there may be many different unit tests in a feature. And so we're discussing essentially the addition of a kind of test, all right? One that is not just for a class, but may involve a few classes together. The whole system in order for that feature to work, all right? And it will pass, the feature test will pass once all your units pass. That's usually what happens. So if we put this in context of the bank challenge, your information is here for what the feature test could look like. So let's do a quick pseudo code of this. So here's the cloned, empty cloned bank challenge repository. And the first thing that you would have to do in this challenge is to initialize it as a node project. Let's just go through all the defaults, and there's nothing else that we need to do at the moment. Let's make sure we install Jasmine as our test framework. Let's initialize it. And then I want to add essentially my high-level feature test bank. Let's call it bank challenge spec. This is where I want to try and convert this information into a high-level test. So what I could do would be something like describe the bank challenge. And then I use a init block to describe can print statement of transactions. Prints a bank statement, and you should see these transactions. Cool. And then I would go through my normal setup, execute, and verify. So in order to set up, we would create some instances of classes. So let's keep it super simple. I see in here, let's just use bank at the moment as a variable. I see here that I need to make a deposit. So at some point, I'll have to create a bank class and a deposit method. There'll be some information here. I'll leave for you to figure out what to put in here. Bank, and then we have to make a withdrawal. Withdraw. Again, you can figure out what arguments it needs. Deposit, and then we come to the assertion. Expect to equal is the way that Jasmine does its assertions. And I want to find a way when you print the bank statement. So there's a few ways you can do this. Normally, if you're just doing all in one class, bank statement to equal, and then this is the result that I want. So I could, let's do a multi-line string to keep the format. This is probably not quite accurate, but it's inaccurate enough. You'll figure it out. Let's say this is the expected. No, I'm just going to just keep it super simple for the moment. Okay. So this is pseudocode. It's not quite accurate. There's a few more things you'd have to do. You have to add in the args. You have to require some classes to get this to work. But this is the format or the way that I want you to start thinking. All right, when you see some requirements or some criteria that you want to achieve, you don't have to worry about what classes they are, but try and write it from a high level feature test and say, this is my definition of done. All right, if I do these things, this is the challenge solved. And so this gives you a way to know, like, you've done the first version of it, you've implemented it if this passes. This will cause you to write more tests, all right? Because you might not only have a bank class, you might end up having more classes, but this spec it doesn't worry about individual units. It just worries about how they all are meant to work together. So you might end up writing specific tests for the bank spec, etc., and you might end up writing more classes and having different specs. But this is the first step to get you thinking about what does done look like? When am I going to have finished? Right? So in order to start these challenges, codify the behavior that you want, and then you can keep building and split into smaller pieces and keep testing it. Thinking about how you write your first feature test, which calls you to write unit tests, and you go through the same cycle until they pass. And once all units are done, then your feature's done. All right. Thoughts and questions?
Ed, with the red-green refactor cycle, doesn't the refactoring come in between the red and the green? I mean, doesn't making it pass the test, isn't that like refactoring the code or changing it or something?
Interesting question. So as a process, write a failing test and then write the least amount of code to make it pass. All right, don't worry about trying to refactor it yet. Usually you just try and get the most simple or even just like crude code just to get your test to pass. Once it's passed, you've implemented something, and then you can think about how to improve it. But the point of the TD process is to always write code as simple as possible to pass the test, because the tests are based on requirements.
Okay, thanks.
You can always then after that process, like refactor at different points, but red, green, refactor is usually the steps you take. Other questions? Good question.
So just to make sure, we can't just write one feature test and then code it all. You have to do, we're still doing the individual unit test. We're just adding this feature test in front of that.
Yeah.
I thought I was getting less work, but I'm actually getting more.
Correct. But you might find this will actually be less work because you'll end up writing better code and you'll have less problems. But yeah,
I see that.
So this is what we call an outside-in approach rather than inside-out. Outside-in means you start from the top of the high level with the feature test to give you the shape, like the definition of done first, and then the rest cascades outside-in. Inside-out would mean you start from the unit test, you try and build your way back up to the high level, and sometimes that involves lots of rewrites until you figure out how they're all meant to work together. So outside in and inside out, if that confuses you, you can forget about it. Don't worry about it. Outside in. This is usually a preferable approach. because it forces you, like the TD process, to always think about what does done look like first. Inside out usually is when you don't have access to some of the parts of the high level, so you have to work at the unit level first. So where possible, always prefer outside in. Any other thoughts or questions?
Sorry, can you just go over the whole outside in stuff, please?
Well, sorry again. What about outside in?
Could you just repeat the stuff that you said about outside in? So
Yeah, okay. So this is an example of an outside-in approach to TDD, where we're starting with a feature test first to give us an understanding of what success looks like. When are we done? And we've done that by making sure we understand the requirements and using the requirements directly to feed into our TDD process. The feature test is tied directly to the user requirements. And from there, we can start to build out more unit tests. All right, feature tests usually use all the tests together with as little mocking or stubbing as needed. We haven't really focused on ISATL unit tests yet, but we'll have a look at this tomorrow morning about mocks and how we use them. So feature tests just use all your classes together to make sure the system is running as expected. And we start there with an outside-in approach. This will then cause us to write more units and more unit tests. This is in comparison to an inside-out approach where you start with the unit tests and then you figure out how to make them work together, and then you build up your feature test if you have access to all the different parts of your system. So where possible, always prefer the outside-in approach. Outside-in, starting with feature test, because you'll be able to get a better sense of what done looks like, what success looks like.
okay, thank you.
Other questions or thoughts?
Sorry, I might have missed it, but what was an example of a future test?
So what do you mean? Because in my eyes, I just gave you an example using the bank challenge.
All right, sorry, I missed it.
So here's an example of one taken directly from the bank challenge. I used the information given to us by the acceptance criteria. I codified it, and then this will force me to write more unit tests for the bank, all these individual methods, and then any other further classes that I need to write.
So a future test is like testing the whole class?
Is essentially testing that the feature works as expected.
Okay.
Always from the point of view of whoever's going to be using your system.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So when we get onto web applications, the feature test will involve clicking on buttons, writing in input fields, simulating the user interacting with our application. Because we don't have any interface at the moment, it's just be creating objects and calling methods directly.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Any further questions? Cool. Okay, so that's it from me this morning. I'm going to stick around for another half an hour if anyone has any questions they want to go through, any technical questions or any questions in general, really. Otherwise, have a fun morning. Do some good work. Focus on those objectives. What do you want to focus on? What do you need to improve? And then see you at 2 o'clock in your peer groups and 2:20 on the cohort Zoom. Enjoy your morning.